Imagine a time when the worst punishment wasn't just death, but something far worse. Something that would make you wish for a swift end, but it wasn't coming. A time when your body, the very skin that protects you, was ripped off, slowly, painfully, and in full view of others. The agony would be unbearable. Yet, this wasn't a scene from a horror movie. This was the horrifying reality of flaying, one of the most brutal, terrifying, gruesome forms of punishment ever be inflicted on human beings. In this video, we're diving deep into the shocking history of flaying, the gruesome reality of this barbaric punishment, and why it was used to send terrifying messages across centuries. We'll explore its origins, the methods used, and the lasting impact of one of history's most disturbing acts. So, stay with us as we uncover the grisly truth behind this cruel punishment and the chilling way it was wielded as a tool of power. Flaying, the process of removing the skin from someone's body while they're still alive, is more than just a horrifying concept. It was a reality that existed across multiple cultures for centuries. For those who didn't know about it, flaying might sound like an idea from a gruesome horror movie, but for thousands of years, it was a very real and horrifying form of punishment used by powerful rulers and governments to maintain control through terror. This wasn't simply about ending someone's life. Flaying was about sending a message. It was about making an example of someone in a way that no one could ever forget. The message was clear. If you dared cross certain authorities, you would suffer a fate worse than death. In this video, we'll dig deeper into the roots of flaying, the reasons behind its use, the methods of execution, and the lasting impact this horrifying act had on those who lived through it, and on those who simply witnessed it. The origins of flaying. Flaying isn't a punishment that appeared overnight. It has its roots in the distant past, a time when brutal displays of power were the norm, and public executions weren't just a form of justice. They were a tool for intimidation. One of the first cultures we can look at in the history of flaying is ancient Mesopotamia. The Assyrians, particularly, were notorious for their extreme cruelty, and flaying was one of their signature punishments. They didn't just kill their enemies or criminals. They made sure to send a message that would last long after the victim was dead. The Assyrians would often flay their enemies alive, cutting off their skin and hanging their bodies for public display. To make it even more horrifying, they would sometimes flay entire cities or villages that resisted their rule. Entire populations would witness the gruesome fate of their fellow citizens, reinforcing the terror that the Assyrian Empire sought to instill. The pain and suffering weren't just for the person being punished. It was meant to break the spirit of entire communities. Fear, after all, was the best way to maintain control over conquered lands. But the Assyrians were not alone in using flaying as a form of punishment. The practice spread to other cultures, including the ancient Egyptians, the Romans, and even some of the barbarian tribes of Europe. Each culture had its own way of utilizing the punishment, but the core purpose remained the same: to instill fear and keep people in line. The most disturbing part is that the people who carried out these punishments didn't see them as acts of cruelty. They were seen as necessary steps to maintain order and show strength. The horrifying methods of flaying. Flaying is not a quick or painless death. It is a complete removal of a person's skin while they're still alive. Let's take a moment to really think about how painful this process must have been. The skin, the largest organ of the body, is tightly attached to the muscles underneath. Removing it is not like peeling an orange. It's a painstaking, slow process that can take hours, sometimes days, during which the victim is conscious in excruciating pain. In ancient times, the method of flaying could vary, but it was always designed to prolong suffering. The skin was usually removed in sections, starting from the extremities, often from the hands or feet, and working upwards toward the torso. The skin would be peeled back, layer by layer, exposing the raw, bleeding flesh beneath. Every pull of the skin was like tearing open the body's defenses. The nerves underneath would be exposed, making every movement of the skin a source of unimaginable pain. In some cases, the victim would be tied to a post or nailed to a cross to prevent movement, further increasing their agony. Sometimes the skin was removed in a single, continuous piece, from head to toe, leaving the victim exposed and vulnerable to shock, blood loss, and infection. The sheer brutality of this act cannot be overstated. It wasn't just about ending someone's life, but about inflicting the worst kind of suffering imaginable. It is said that some victims would die from the shock of the pain, while others would last longer, succumbing to infections or blood loss. The fact that the person remained alive for so long was part of the intended horror of the punishment. It was not just a physical agony, but the psychological terror of knowing that death was not immediate. Flaying as a public spectacle. What makes flaying even more horrifying is that it was rarely done in private. This was not an execution that took place behind closed doors. It was a public spectacle, often carried out in front of large crowds. The idea behind this wasn't just to punish the individual. It was about sending a message to everyone else who might witness the event. By making the act public, the rulers or authorities could instill a deep fear in the hearts of the population, showing them the consequences of defying the state. Imagine yourself in a crowd, watching a person being flayed alive. You can hear their screams, see the blood, feel the fear in the air. The public execution wasn't just about punishing the one person. It was a warning to everyone else. This was the power of spectacle. It wasn't only the person being punished who suffered, but the collective consciousness of society watching the event unfold. The very idea that anyone could face such a fate made every single person in that society question their every action. These public executions were carefully staged to maximize fear. Sometimes, the bodies of the victims were left on display for days, as a gruesome reminder of the consequences of resistance. If flaying wasn't enough to deter rebellion, seeing the decaying bodies of those who had been punished would often do the trick. The psychological toll of these spectacles was profound, leaving entire populations terrified of stepping out of line. The psychological impact of flaying. The impact of flaying wasn't just physical. It also had a lasting psychological effect on those who witnessed it. The mere threat of flaying was enough to keep people in check. Imagine knowing that you live in a world where your skin could be taken from you, slowly and painfully, just because of crime, a betrayal, or even a simple misstep. The fear of flaying created an atmosphere of constant anxiety, where everyone feared the consequences of any act that might challenge the existing order. For the victim, the process was pure hell. But for the witnesses, the horror wasn't just in the act itself. It was a fear that they could one day be next. It was about the loss of humanity, the stripping away of the most basic element that separates us from animals. To witness such a punishment would be to witness the complete breakdown of what it means to be human. This kind of psychological horror often stayed with people for years. Those who saw these executions couldn't forget what they had witnessed. The memory of a person being flayed alive could haunt them for the rest of their lives. Flaying wasn't just about punishing a single person. It was about creating an entire culture of fear. Flaying in medieval and Renaissance Europe. While flaying may have originated in the ancient world, it didn't die out with the fall of the Roman Empire. In fact, it continued to be practiced in medieval and Renaissance Europe, often as a form of punishment for heretics, traitors, or witches. The Inquisition, which was responsible for rooting out heresy in Europe, sometimes resorted to flaying as a tool to extract confessions from those accused of religious crimes. This form of torture and execution was used not only to punish the accused, but also to deter others from engaging in any behavior deemed subversive or heretical. The very idea of being flayed alive was enough to silence many people, as they feared the terrible fate that awaited them if they were accused of anything even remotely close to a crime. The grotesque nature of flaying as a punishment fit into a broader culture of public torture and execution during this time period. The goal was to instill terror and maintain control, especially in a world where the church and the monarchy held enormous power over people's lives. The decline of flaying as a punishment. As time passed and society evolved, flaying began to fall out of favor as a form of punishment. The Enlightenment, with its focus on human rights and individual dignity, led to the gradual abandonment of such brutal methods of punishment. Philosophers and reformers began to push for more humane forms of justice, ones that did not involve such horrific acts of violence. By the 19th century, flaying had all but disappeared from the legal punishments of most countries. It was replaced with other forms of capital punishment, which, while still deadly, were seen as more humane in comparison to the slow, agonizing death that flaying brought. Despite its decline, the legacy of flaying remains in history's darkest corners. The terror it inspired and the psychological scars it left behind continue to haunt the past. It is a reminder of the extremes that people once went for control and of the terrible power of fear. Flaying across different cultures. While flaying is most commonly associated with ancient Mesopotamian cultures, its practice spread throughout various civilizations, with each applying its unique twist on this gruesome punishment. In the ancient world, flaying was often used in the context of war and conquest. It was a tool of psychological warfare meant to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy. For example, the Mongols, known for their brutal tactics on the battlefield, would sometimes flay prisoners of war alive. The Mongols also used the display of flayed bodies as a warning to anyone who might dare to stand against them. In China, during the Qin dynasty, Emperor Qin Shi Huang, notorious for his desire to build a Great Wall and unify China, employed a form of flaying to suppress rebellion. Those who were suspected of plotting against the empire were subjected to painful public executions, with flaying being one of the most extreme punishments for serious criminals. The brutal nature of these acts was intended to discourage any future uprisings and to establish absolute authority over the empire. The fear of flaying ensured that many would think twice before even considering resistance. The Aztecs, with their bloodthirsty religious practices, also employed flaying as a form of ritual sacrifice. While they didn't always flay their victims in the exact manner we might think of, they would sometimes remove the skin of those they sacrificed. These rituals were performed to appease the gods and ensure the survival of the Aztec civilization. The act of flaying was intertwined with their religious beliefs, as the Aztecs believed that offering human blood would help nourish the gods and bring them strength. This practice was not limited to war captives, but extended to prisoners of war as well. These examples show that flaying wasn't just a form of punishment. It was also a tool for maintaining power, asserting dominance, and appeasing gods. Its practice spanned across cultures, often serving as a method of reinforcing the authority of the ruling elite. Despite its gruesome nature, flaying was not viewed with the same horror we associate with it today. For many ancient civilizations, the act of flaying symbolized strength and control over one's enemies. Flaying and its role in military strategy. Flaying wasn't just used as a form of punishment for civilians. It had a significant place in the military strategy of several empires. As we mentioned earlier, the Assyrians, known for their ruthless approach to warfare, frequently used flaying as a psychological tool to break the spirit of their enemies. When they conquered a city or a town, the Assyrians would display the bodies of their defeated enemies, sometimes flayed, as a warning to other regions not to resist. These public displays were intended to show that defying the Assyrians would lead to the most horrifying of ends. The act of flaying became part of the terror that surrounded Assyrian conquests, and it served as a reminder of the empire's complete dominance. But it wasn't just the Assyrians who used flaying in military campaigns. The Roman Empire, famous for its military might, also made use of flaying during periods of conquest. Roman soldiers, when victorious, would sometimes flay the bodies of defeated enemy soldiers to create fear among potential rebels. This brutal display was meant to send a message to any would-be traitors or enemies of the empire: defy Rome, and you risk a fate worse than death. The Roman Empire, like the Assyrians, understood that the psychological impact of flaying far exceeded the physical act itself. In a world where communication was slow and the empire's reach was vast, the mere knowledge of what happened to captured soldiers or enemies in conquered lands spread quickly. Stories of the grisly punishments would filter back to the homeland, creating a sense of fear that made many people think twice about opposing Roman authority. Flaying is a tool of social control. Flaying wasn't just a punishment for criminals or soldiers. It was also used as a tool to maintain social control. In certain societies, the ruling elite used a fear of flaying to ensure compliance with laws and rules. By making an example of those who disobeyed, they could intimidate others into submission. The fear of such a brutal punishment was often more effective than any law enforcement system, as the public's dread of flaying would keep them in line. In many cases, people would choose to remain silent about potential wrongdoing or corruption because of the risk that revealing too much might lead to their own punishment. Just like the threat of torture was used to extract confessions during inquisitions, the threat of flaying was used to suppress dissent in the population. If someone were accused of treason or conspiracy, the fear of flaying would often silence opposition. Even in medieval times, rulers used the threat of flaying as a form of intimidation to keep their subjects from rebellion. Whether in the context of political conspiracies, religious heresy, or criminal acts, The idea of being flayed alive kept many from challenging the authority of the crown, church, or local rulers. The mere knowledge of this form of punishment was enough to create an atmosphere of fear and obedience. The impact of flaying on cultural history. The fear of flaying has left its mark on the cultural memory of various societies. The act of flaying has been depicted in art, literature, and folklore across many different cultures, highlighting its lasting impact on human consciousness. For centuries, the image of a person being flayed has been used as a symbol of ultimate suffering and punishment, representing the extremities of cruelty. In the medieval period, flaying was often depicted in religious texts and illustrations, meant to represent the fate that awaited heretics or traitors. These illustrations were not just artistic depictions. They were meant to instill fear in the people who viewed them. Flaying became associated with punishment in the afterlife, especially in Christian teachings, where the act of skinning was often depicted as a punishment for sin. The idea of eternal suffering was frequently connected to such gruesome images, reinforcing the power of religious authority in controlling both life and death. During the Renaissance, artists like Francisco Goya and Hieronymus Bosch created works that depicted scenes of suffering, torture, and punishment, with flaying often appearing as one of the most disturbing subjects. These works were not just meant to shock. They were reflections of the darker side of human nature and the extremities of human cruelty. Even as we moved into the modern age, the legacy of flaying continued to influence how we view punishment and violence. In literature, the image of flaying appears in works meant to explore the boundaries of cruelty, justice, and human suffering. These representations keep the memory of such punishments alive, ensuring that the fear of flaying will always be a part of the cultural consciousness. The terrifying nature of flaying has become an archetype in both fiction and reality, representing the ultimate form of suffering and the capacity for cruelty that exists within humanity. Flaying in modern culture. Even in today's world, the concept of flaying continues to haunt the public imagination. It's a punishment that has found its way into popular media, from films to video games. While we no longer see it as a real form of punishment, it still serves as a symbol of ultimate cruelty and violence. The fear and terror associated with flaying have been carried into modern storytelling, where it is used to depict villains or oppressive regimes that seek to control others through fear and pain. Films, books, and TV shows that delve into historical horrors often use flaying as a symbol of the brutality of ancient civilizations. From the horror genre to historical dramas, flaying is depicted as one of the most terrifying forms of violence, meant to show just how far human beings were once willing to go to maintain control over others. While flaying may have been abolished as a form of punishment, its legacy continues to influence how we understand cruelty, power, and the lengths some will go to instill fear. Flaying is one of the most brutal punishments in human history, a gruesome reminder of the darkness in our past. It wasn't just about killing someone. It was about making them suffer, about instilling terror and fear. The psychological impact of witnessing such horrors cannot be overstated. Flaying was a punishment designed to break people, to send a message that death wasn't the worst thing that could happen to you. While flaying is no longer practiced, it reminds us of the extremes people once went to for power and control, and how far we've come in terms of human rights. If you found this story chilling, subscribe and turn on notifications for more history's most terrifying moments. Leave a comment below. What do you think about the history of flaying? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.